Okay, so you want to add a picture of a food or drink on your packaging and you don't know how? Keep on watching. In this video, we're going to show you what to do and how to be compliant with the UK and the EU legislation. A pictorial representation, which is also called a depiction, is basically any photograph, images or graphic of a food or drink that you want to put on the front of your pack. Let's say a strawberry, for example. It basically shows to the consumers that if that food is depicted on your packaging, it must be contained in your product. And that's why the name and the description of your product must align with the food that is depicted. And bear in mind that most of the time consumers will think that this food is depicted come from real ingredients and not flavorings. And that's why the legislation is so strict on what you have to do to be able to depict on the front of your packaging. Don't think it's just a little strawberry picture. It's much more complicated than that. But the purpose is to not mislead the consumers. The EU and the UK legislation basically said that if you want to depict a food or drink on your packaging, not only your product must contain that food or drink you want to depict, but it also must taste like it. So if you want to depict a raspberry, for example, on your packaging, then your product must contain actual real raspberries, but also it has to taste like raspberry. So for that, you have three methods. The first one is you can use ingredients alone. So if we keep our raspberry, for example, you can use raspberry pieces or puree in your product. And the second thing you can use is just flavorings. But there is a catch. If you use only flavorings, in this case, you have to be sure your flavorings contain a minimum of 51% of the food you want to depict to be able to use it. So if we keep our raspberry example, you have to choose a flavoring that contains a minimum of 51% of raspberry in the flavorings. And that can be with raspberry esters, for example. And the third option you can have is to use a combination of ingredients and flavorings. But again, it's not that easy. If the taste of your product comes from mainly the ingredients you want to depict, then it doesn't matter the type of flavoring that you use. But if the taste of your product comes from mainly or only from the flavoring of the food you want to depict, in this case you have to follow the same rule as before, where the flavoring you select must contain a minimum of 51% of the food you want to depict. Okay, so we have established now that in some cases you need to use a flavoring that contains a minimum of 51% of the food you want to depict. But there is unfortunately another layer to that. This type of flavoring and the 51% has to be found in nature. So this 51% has to come from actual oranges, cinnamon barks, rose petals, cacao beans, vanilla beans, these kind of things. Anything that is human-made can't be found in this 51%. So you can't find anything like chocolate, sugar, a pie, a bread or croissant, anything like that. In the EU and the UK, there are three types of flavorings you can use that contain a minimum of 51% of the food you want to depict. The first one is called a natural eggs flavoring with other natural flavorings. As a shortcut, we call it a WOMF. So for example, a natural strawberry flavoring with other natural flavorings. It means that mainly that flavor contains actual strawberry. So strawberry esters or juice concentrate, for example. And the rest is here to complement the flavor profile, and it comes from real oranges or blackcurrant juices, for example. The main thing is the quantity of this real ingredient has to be less than 95%, and you will understand in a minute why. So it can be a good flavoring if you want something cheaper, for example. And if we come back to needs to be found in nature problem, You won't be able to find a natural chocolate flavoring with other natural flavorings. It's just not allowed. Instead, you can have a natural cacao flavoring with other natural flavorings. The second type of flavoring you can use are called natural eggs flavoring. So for example, natural strawberry flavoring. We also call this type of flavor FTNF from the name fruit or 955 as a shortcut. So basically, this type of flavoring must contain a minimum of 95% of the named fruit or the fruit that you want to depict. That's why they are more expensive. And if we come back to our find in nature problem, it's exactly the same. You won't be able to find a natural chocolate flavoring. Again, not allowed. Instead, you can have a natural cacao flavoring. The third type of flavoring you can find are extracts, essences, or oleoresins. In this case, they contain 100% of the food that you want to depict. So for example, you can find vanilla extract, coffee extract, orange essential oils, cinnamon oleoresin. And again, exactly the same as before. I know I keep repeating myself, but it's so important. You can't find a chocolate extract. It's just not allowed from the legislation. Instead, you can find cacao extract. Okay, so let's talk about best practices. And I have to say, I'm still shocked sometimes to see on shelf some mistakes that the food industry does. The first one is serving suggestion. So you can use that sentence if the food and drink you depict is not present in your product, but instead you want to advise your consumers to eat it or drink it with it. The second rule is proportionality. So it means whatever food you depict has to be proportional of the quantity in your actual product. So if you use a little bit of strawberry, for example, in your product, do not put a huge, massive strawberry on your packaging, right? And the third one, which is probably the least understood among all, is flavored against flavor. Lots of mistakes, again, that I can see all the time. So if you use X flavored in your product name or description, it means you have followed all of the rules we mentioned before in terms of having actual ingredients or using flavorings that contain a minimum of 51% of the food you want to depict. The depiction is therefore allowed, as we mentioned so far. And for example, you can have apple flavored drink. If you use X flavor, it means that you don't have the real ingredients or you don't have the flavor that contain a minimum of 51% of the food you want to depict. Therefore, the depiction is not allowed. You will have, for example, apple flavor drink. Okay, so as we saw today, adding just a little picture of strawberry on your packaging is not that easy. But again, the legislation is so strict because they don't want the food industry to mislead the consumers. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!